Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Book Bites. And I am thrilled to welcome this week Helen Signy. Hi Helen, lovely to have you
Hi,
here.
lovely to see you.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking today about your debut novel, Maya's Dance, and turning fact into fiction. But before we do, I'm just going to pop up the details of our giveaway. As usual here at Book Bites, we have a giveaway. So for anyone who leaves a comment or asks a question, whether you're watching this back later or during the live right now, you can go into the draw to win a copy of this fabulous debut by Helen. So fact into fiction, it's a tricky area to go into, regardless of what sort of facts that you are turning into fiction. And Maya's Dance is a story based on a real woman named Lucy Pollock Langford, who you came across. And the first question I wanted to ask you, Helen, was why did you decide to write a fictional account of Lucy's story?
So I'm a former journo. I was with the Sydney Morning Herald for a long time, and I just heard the story one day when I was at my daughter's ballet lesson. My friend told me about it, and in typical journo style, I thought, oh, that's a great story. I'll have to pitch it to Reader's Digest or something like that. But and just sat with it, and so I suppose when I first heard it, I was going to write a factual account as I was used to from being a journalist. Um, and then it sort of just sat with me for a couple of years, and I just kept thinking about it. Um, and then I guess, reading various books, Holocaust literature and Holocaust films, I just thought, you know, what really interested me about the story was that when Lucy was taken to the camp, she was a teenager. She was the same age as my daughter was at the time, and basically fell in love, had her first love in the camp, and he was the one that got her out. And I was just so interested in what that would be like for a teenager to experience amid this awful, horrific backdrop. And I thought just going through the account of the escape factually, I mean, it's an amazing story, but you wouldn't have that depth of understanding of the character. Plus, I was, my kids are getting older, and I thought, I know, I'll write a novel. How hard can it be? so I thought, I'll try and write a novel, and and it turned into Maya's Dance, much to my amazement.
Yeah, famous last words. How hard can it be? One of the things we were talking about off camera, and I've spoken about this with other historical fiction writers before, is that fiction is far more accessible to people, I find, than, wading through a textbook or things like that. Is that part of the reason why you decided to fictionalize this?
Well, absolutely. So, why I chose Holocaust literature as my debut, I don't know. With hindsight, it probably wasn't a great period of history to write about, but it's a really fraught area, and I'm sure the listeners will know of cases where people have written about the Holocaust and got into trouble. There's been, ever since the end of the war, there's been questions about whether it's okay to fictionalize it. I think there was one critic and academic in the 40s who said to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. So there was this feeling for a long, long time that, only people who had experienced it, and I suppose then their children or historians, actually had any authority to write about it at all. But that's changing. It's a long, long time ago now. It's nearly 80 years since the end of the war, since the camps were liberated, and there's hardly any survivors left anymore. And I think, when I met Lucy, I only met her once, and she already had dementia, but like, she's this most precious old lady with all these experiences, with this incredible insight that she had gained from seeing the absolute worst that humanity could have ever thrown at her, and then going on to live her life and carry on surviving and seeing the good in everything. And I thought, she's so precious. That's what I want people to know. I just don't want them to know the facts and the numbers and everything. So yeah, that is a big reason why I decided to do it as historical fiction.
And you told me a statistic off camera that blew my mind away about high school students. What was that statistic, Helen?
The most recent survey, which I think was a couple of years ago in the States, was something like 1 in 8 high school students have never heard of the Holocaust. They haven't even heard that word. They've got no idea. Um, and I suppose it's, do they know the events of the First World War? I mean, it's history for them. It's like so separated from their lives, I guess. But I just think it's really important to keep the learnings about it around. It was the absolute biggest aberration in humanity that we know, like regardless of whatever's happening at the
Mhm.
moment or what else has happened in history. It was industrial scale genocide over a few years, and we've got to stop it happening again. So
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing to keep the stories alive. And actually, when I wrote the book, I was thinking it would be more for people my kind of age, and sort of book club mums. But it's actually proving really popular with younger girls
Yeah.
and women. Like somebody said she'd given it to her 12-year-old,
Wow.
who had loved it. Yeah, and I mean, it's pretty. It's got some brutal bits in it, but it is essentially a love story.
Yeah.
Um, so I think if I can reach some younger readers and for them encapsulate the Holocaust in something like that, as happened to my own daughter when she read The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, then I think
Mm,
that's a
mm.
good thing, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So when you are fictionalizing somebody else's story, regardless of what time period or what events we're talking about, what is it that you have to take into consideration or permissions that you have to get, to head down that road?
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to know Lucy's family through a mutual friend from where I live on the northern beaches. So she asked them.
Mhm.
Um, so absolutely, the first thing was to ask the family's permission, and then. I never thought I was going to finish the novel, let alone get it published. To be honest, I did. So before I did it, I didn't I didn't really, well, I had asked them if it was okay, but I didn't do anything special. But once it was picked up by an agent, then I went to her husband, who's still alive, and um, asked him to sign something. And I,
Mhm.
I don't know whether he's read it. He's 97. He looked at the manuscript and said, "Oh, it's a lot of words." Um, but anyway, Lucy always wanted her story to be told, and he was very happy for me to do it. So that's the key thing. And then the other thing, I've done a really involved author's note at the back of the book because
Yes.
and I guess that's my journalism coming out. In journalism, you have to attribute everything and be able
Mhm.
to stand up in a court of law and say where you got your facts from. So that's what I've done in the author's note and said, yeah, this scene was real, this scene was made up, so just to, I guess, to kind of cover myself. But also, I mean, incredibly, most of the scenes are true. So, yeah, it's stuck really closely to what actually happened to Lucy and the
Yeah,
camp.
right. That was actually going to be my next question because it's not Lucy's story as such, it's Maya's
Yeah.
story, and how much of Maya's story is fact and how much is from your creative mind.
Yeah. So, look, the basic facts are the same. So,
Mhm.
she was sent to a labor camp, not a death camp. So that's true. That the location of the camp is true, and I actually went there. So all I haven't changed the name of the commandant. Who's this very sadistic, awful camp leader. Um, I've changed most of the names in it, but essentially, she went there. She had to dig in the fields every day, and then, as people got weaker and more hungry and more sick, they were carted off to Sobibor, which was just up the road. So that's all true. She fell in love with this guard who wasn't SS. For people who haven't read it, he was Polish. So he was also being oppressed by the Nazis, but she fell in love with the guard. He got her out and, hid her in various different places and then put her on a train and they never saw each other again. So that is all true. But even down to, what they wore, like they weren't in striped clothes, they were just in their normal clothes that they took with them. And thank goodness she had taken her ski jacket, so she could be warm during the brutal winter. Things like what they ate. There's a whole scene they somehow managed to barter at the fence and get some butter and flour and an egg or something and cook some pancakes. Like, they cook pancakes in a concentration camp. It's
Yeah.
incredible. And of course, all the dancing and the music and stuff didn't necessarily all happen to Lucy, but it all happened in some camp somewhere in the Holocaust.
Yeah, they put on a concert in Maya's story, and you said that that was actually more common than we would think.
It was,
That
yeah.
was true.
Yeah, it was amazing. So I guess, I'd associated music with the Holocaust. Like, I think we all know about the violinists that were playing when
Yeah.
people arrived at Auschwitz. So I'd sort of heard of that. And in Terezin, which was like this massive staging camp, they had orchestras and stuff like that. And I think I'd heard of that. But actually, there was performance all through the Holocaust. Like,
Mm.
a lot of reasonably famous dancers were sent, and they managed to sort of carry on living day to day by dancing. There's an account in Terezin of, because the kids weren't allowed to be educated in the camp, so
Yeah.
they had all these kids and didn't know how to entertain them, and they were hungry, of course, so they just got them to do dances. And oh, there was a famous dancer who was the subject of one of Mengelé's experiments, I think. So yeah, there was dance and performance all the way through, and it wasn't. You'd think it would be very slow, sensual, sort of sad dance. It wasn't. It was burlesque and knees up and doing the can and stuff like that. And when I thought about it, I thought, like, I would want that too. If you're living in these awful, awful conditions, like, it's human nature to look for something happy and something joyful. And I think that's, when they dance, they could forget their surroundings, and they could just connect to their physicality and feel themselves move, feel the blood in their veins, and feel like humans again. So I think that's why it was. Yeah.
And I think there's something also inherently human and primitive about song and dance and artistic expression, and connecting with that during dark times is something that we need as human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. The human spirit prevails no matter how awful things are. People still fall in love. Like that, there were babies born in concentration camps. I mean, incredibly. The people crave normality in human relationships. But the other reason that I put so much dance in there was, while I was writing it, my mum had end stage dementia. She's passed away now, but right until the end, like, she couldn't speak. She could hardly move anymore. But the thing that stayed with her was music. So you would just put on, I don't know, the Sound of Music or Vera Lynn or something like, and she'd wake up and she'd get all happy and everything. And that there's lots of evidence that music changes the brain in some way. It sparks up the neural pathways. I think because it's so connected with physical movement. So the book's in dual timelines, and I have Maya as an older lady as she's going into dementia. So I wanted that theme of music and dance to carry her through. And it starts off, she's listening to the song again, and it takes her back to the camp, because I know that's what happened with mum as well. She forgot all the recent stuff, but she went back to when she was a child. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really strong theme.
And we see that with the modern day, and forgive me if this is the wrong terminology, the dementia choirs that now exist, and it's a form of treatment for patients with dementia, and they can go back in and they remember the lyrics and they can sing
Yeah,
them, and yeah, it's a really beautiful thing.
yeah,
You mentioned Jan, the guard that helps Maya escape, and as you said, he's a Polish guard, so he's not part of the SS, and we do have quite a few chapters from his point of view, or scenes from his point of view. How did you go about finding his voice to portray that?
oh well. I ran away from it for about the first three drafts. So he wasn't, I mean, of course he was in there as a foil to Maya, but I just had this one sort of important scene at the end. That's the only scene I had from his point of view for a long time. And I think it's because I just didn't know what his motivation would have been. There's the whole question of consent. From our perspective, having been through Me Too and everything, you've got to ask those questions. And in real life, he was much older than she was as well. So
Mhm.
I just, yeah, I couldn't imagine it from his perspective. And then the editor said to me, I love that scene of Jan. Why don't you just try and write some stuff from his point of view? And oh my gosh, I wrote the first scene. It's like, whoa, it just leapt out. You know how characters do that somehow.
Yeah.
It's like he had always been wanting to be written, and and was quite cross with me for having not given him more. So yeah, so I just, look, he's 19 in the book. I've got a young adult son, so I guess I sort of channeled him a bit, and
Yep.
the anger to his father. Not that my son's angry with my husband, but I had his motivation, that he was very angry with his father in the book because the father's chief of police. So
Yep.
that's sort of what motivates him to take this incredibly dangerous step to form a relationship with one of the prisoners. And then it just sort of took off from there. And I guess a lot of imagination, of course, about what it would have been like to be in the resistance in Poland during the war and how scary it would have been. And
Yep.
yeah, so I'm glad I put him in. I think he deserved to be in there.
Yes. Oh, he absolutely did. And as you said, at its heart, Maya's Dance is a love story, and it's a story of hope. What I wanted to ask, because you kind of took me on a roller coaster with this. There were moments where I was like, oh, and I was like, oh, and I was like, like, like seriously, you really did put me through my paces when I was reading this. I'm like, she's not going to do. Oh my God, she did. Like, I wanted to ask you, Helen, how did you find the balance of describing, the horrors that Maya was experiencing, which, obviously is going to happen in a story based in the Holocaust, but also that love and the hope, and when to suck me in with those gentle moments, and then when to, whack me on the side of the head with the horrible moments.
So, well, I mean, I suppose I started off just writing the story, because again, coming from a journalist background, that's what I knew. So I just got it all down, and then I went back in the next draft and put in some of the more human things, and then I realized. So I hadn't, when I first wrote it, I thought the story was going to be the escape, and then as I got into it, I just thought it just became the love story. Like that's the
Mm.
central thing. But it kind of gets darker and darker. So and as did her experience in the camp, when they got there, because it wasn't a death camp, it was a labor camp, and it wasn't that bad. Like there was very limited food, but they were surviving, they were brutal things happening, but they didn't know that they were destined to die at all for a long time. That was all hidden from them. Um, so, she did strike up in real life. Lucy did strike up friendships and develop this relationship. So I concentrated on that. And then as things get worse and worse, and I've sort of tied it in with the seasons as well, it draws into winter and then gets colder and darker, and things get to the point that she realizes she can't stay. She has to get out, otherwise she's going to die. So yeah, I don't actually know how I did it. Just sort of came out.
Well, you did do it very well, and you also did a really good job of ratcheting up the pace and the tension as we build to that, the particular point of the escape and what's going to happen. And yeah, I was like, my heart was beating, faster and faster as we got into those later chapters. So, congratulations on that, particularly for a debut. That's fantastic, fantastic work. Now, we've spoken a bit about Maya and a little bit about Jan, but there's also another character in the story that we need to talk about, because it's just as much her story as anyone else's, and that is the journalist Kate. She's trying to help Maya find Jan, and she's dealing with her own heartache and personal situation at the same time. Why did you decide to have those two parallel stories of Kate and Maya?
So I wanted, because so I did lots of research. Being the journo, that's how I started off. Never written a book before, so I'll just do lots of research. And what I came across was not just the accounts of how people survived in the camps, but how the surviving continued afterwards. Like Holocaust survivors are still surviving today. It's if you live with that sort of trauma and background in you, it's a daily proposition to survive. And all the accounts I read were just so beautiful and so full of joy and kindness, like Eddie Jaku, his message. And I
Mm.
think that's really resonates. So I wanted to bring that into it somehow. And also I remember when, so Kate is very closely based on me arriving in Sydney in the 90s. I didn't have my heart broken, but I was a bit lonely and,
I was
you know,
wondering about that.
young journalist at the Herald, not really knowing what I was doing here and everything. And I remember one of the early jobs I did was to go and interview Holocaust survivors when the Schindler's List was released, and I had to go,
Right.
young journalist, how did you feel about the film? And it was, so anyway, and I'll never forget meeting those Holocaust survivors and just how gentle and calm they were. So I've sort of wanted to recreate that, but basically Kate is a foil for
Mhm.
Maya to impart her wisdom that she's got over the years. And then in terms of her own story, I just wanted it to be like the worst thing most of us have ever experienced in our lives is probably a heartbreak, hopefully. I mean, some people have had worse things, but, getting dumped by a partner is really bloody painful. And I just thought I wanted to show how, we're so soft today. Like we don't have to deal, a lot of us, with awful things that happen as they did in the war. So I wanted Kate to be sort of our perspective, being exposed to this much deeper trauma that Maya had had, but through knowing Maya, it lifts Kate up as well.
Mm, mm.
And look, there's real parallels with me. Like in the last few years writing this book, it has changed the way I view life. Really, I'm like really trying now to see the good in people, because if you think too much about the bad, it just overwhelms you. So, trying to do what Lucy did and see the good.
I'm going to go off topic here a little bit, just as you were talking about your experience as a journalist and interviewing people after Schindler's List came out. As a journalist, you do often have to speak with people at their lowest points in life. You see people being interviewed after they've lost their loved ones in a car crash or a house fire or, whatever the case may be. How do you do that as a journalist? You've obviously got a job to do to get a story, but you're also dealing with a human being on the other side of it. How do you balance that?
Well, I mean, look, I've had some awful cases where I've been sent by the news editor and the people have not wanted to talk, and I felt very intrusive. They call them death knocks, and it's awful, but you go and knock on the door and ask if they want to say something to get a quote for a story that's then going to be fish and chip wrapping the next day. But in most cases, I've actually found that people want to talk. You know, it's the to have somebody interested in this awful thing that's happened in their life somehow validates it, I think. So,
Mm, mm,
you cut I mean, when I think back, I was so young and so naive and why they were talking to me, but they often did. And in fact, I was only a news reporter for a few years, and then I went off and started doing features, and that's much more in my comfort zone when you have much longer discussions for an hour or two with somebody and really get to the heart of what they're feeling about something. So yeah, no, I think people quite like it, especially if
mm,
it's you know after the event, a few weeks or months afterwards. It's sort of almost like therapy, and I would
mm,
always check things with them as well to check they're happy for it. And then of course, if it's been the result of a crime or something, it's really important to get that information out there.
yeah.
The effect on the victim, I think, is crucial. So yeah, I guess it's a service, but not an easy thing to do at all. Some people are much better at it than others, but yeah, I wouldn't want to do a death knock again.
Do you still work as a journalist, Helen?
I still contribute to the Reader's Digest, but in recent years I've been doing science communications, so more sort of storytelling to explain science. So yes, went to
Mm.
the dark side.
Now, obviously, when you're writing a story like Myers, you have to do an awful lot of research. And I read a quote somewhere once by some famous, I think it was an American author somewhere, that 90% of the research we do doesn't ever make it onto the page. So, in all of that research that you must have done for this book, was there something that really surprised you that you discovered?
Oh my gosh, that like so much. Well, I think I think the extent of the Holocaust. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. Like we all go to school and learn about the Holocaust, and you know the figure 6 million people murdered, but until you actually go there and see it for your with your own eyes, like the size of these camps were, it was like, half of the suburb, the massive, massive expanses just packed in with people. Um, the depravity of it, like it's just how the victims were completely dehumanized, and that it wasn't just Jewish people, of course. There was political dissidents and gypsies and gay people. I mean, all sorts of people were sent to the camp. So just the extent of the torture that they were subjected to. Um, but the little human touch is the fact that they could buy food at the edge, the fact that there was music, the fact that they fell in love. I mean, that was just all really delightful to find out. I mean, most of the book, fact, like you said, most of it gets thrown away. So facts aren't really what you're after when you're writing historical fiction, apart from as a background. It's more, what it was like to be there. So I was really lucky to get to go to Poland and walk in the village where it had happened and look at the trees and think
Mhm.
what it would have been like to be Maya, escaping through the woodland, knowing that there were Nazis on the road that could arrest her at any time. So it's just sort of the feeling of the place, I think was the main thing that I got out of the research.
Mhm. And finding that human side of the facts and the figures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's really difficult, to write from our privileged modern perspective. Like the book is completely it's based on my emotional journey and my
Yeah.
interpretations. I can't ever know what it would have been like to be born in the 1930s and go to a concentration camp, of course, so I'm interpreting it, but yeah, I lived in my imagination a lot while I was doing it. So yeah, most of the research didn't get used, apart from the all the research about Holocaust survivorship. I've used like loads of that in
Yeah.
Maya's conversations with Kate.
Yeah. And this is your first foray into fiction, your first published work of fiction. What has surprised you the most about writing fiction?
I think how lovely it is, like so I coming from a newsroom, you get told to write 600 words by 6 o'clock, and and it's just automatic. And then, especially going into science communications, like a lot of my day job is very dry. So it's just been once I've worked out how you do it. So, as I said, when I first started, I was just writing a report. And then once I worked out that you can put in feelings and emotions and live it a bit, you dream it onto the page. That was absolutely lovely. And then I think you told me this once, once when you're writing, you're walking around and you're sort of looking at people and they end up in your book, and it is you look at the sky and think of how you would describe that in a different way, and it just makes you really observant, I think, which I didn't realize. So no, I absolutely love it. I mean, I've found what I want to do for the rest of my life, I think, now.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah,
so
no, it's
good.
been great. Yeah.
Yeah. I often say that as writers, we are first and foremost observers.
Yeah.
We really do
Oh,
have to observe what's going on around us, and in a slightly different way than most people, I guess. Has that been the best part of the journey so far, discovering that creativity within the writing? Or is
that's been absolutely lovely, but I have to say the publication process has blown me away as well, because, like I said, when I started writing it, it was just more to see, oh, could I ever write a novel? I never thought it would get picked up. And then there's all these little milestones along the way. So the agent picked it up, and then you get a book deal, and that's been incredible. And then the publication, it's just been a whirlwind. And the nicest thing that I hadn't expected is how supportive all the other authors are, because in the world of journalism and academia that I'm in with my day job, it's quite competitive. While there's collaboration, of course, it's not like authors who just like everybody's on your team and they're all sort of supporting you and lifting you up. And I thought I'd feel jealous when I saw other people's books on a better position on the shelves than mine. But no, it's more like, oh, you've met that person and look how well they're doing. So yeah, it's been really unexpectedly supportive and nice. And I've
Mm.
met some lovely people already. So that's been great.
Yeah, it's really interesting that that's something that always comes up with people when they start their journey in the writing community. And I do often get questions from readers going, is that just for show? Is that just for social media? I'm like, no, it actually, like, behind the scenes, we are in each other's corners all the time.
Mm. And I think, somebody said to me, I think it was the managing director, Simon and Schuster, actually, he said, you will never forget publishing your debut book.
Yeah.
He said, just enjoy it. And really, nobody can really understand in the same way as other debut authors. So I'm in a group of debut authors, and no question is off limits. Like, what are you going to wear for your launch? Because of course you're sitting up in front of everybody. You don't want anyone to see your knees, kind of thing. And like, well, what my agent said this to me. What do you think that means? It's like a mother's group for
Yeah.
book babies, which has been absolutely lovely. So yeah, it does feel like I've had a baby. In a way. Although a lot less trouble after the birth.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to pop up the details of where you can find Helen out there in cyberspace. If anyone does have any questions, now is the time to pop them in, because we will be wrapping this up very shortly. While this is up there on screen, actually, the cover is beautiful, Helen. Did you have any say in that?
Yes, a little bit. So when I first got it, my first thought was it wasn't how I expected it at all. I was thinking, Holocaust, and it would be all grey and dark and everything. And then they sent this pink cover. And they explained it in this is not how she would have looked in the concentration camp. Of course,
No.
this was her escape through dance. So I was very surprised at it, and now I just absolutely love it. Yeah, just I don't know. It says what the novel's about somehow, and when you see them on the shelf together, it looks like she's twirling. So yeah, no, I really loved it. I was surprised by it, but I really, really loved it.
Excellent. We've got I'm not sure if it's a comment or a question. I'll just pop it up on screen from Yvonne. As readers, we really love to meet our authors, and it's so lovely to find that they are so supportive of each other. It's nice to meet new authors and hear about their books. Thanks so much, Yvonne. Yvonne's one of our regulars here at Book Bites. So what is next for you?
So I was sorry if you can hear my dogs barking. The postman just came to the door. So I was really lucky to get a 2-book deal from Simon and Schuster. So I'm just writing book 2 now, while trying to do everything else. So it's sort of a similar vibe, I suppose. It's a escape from oppression, and it's a love story, but it's going to be set in Ukraine. Because I discovered, so my family history, we'd always been told we were from Russia, and then we did an ancestry.com DNA thing. I gave one to my dad for his 90th birthday or something, and it turns out we're actually from Ukraine. So I thought, oh, that's a good good peg for a book. So yeah, I'm researching Ukraine at the turn of the 20th century now.
The turn of the 20th. We're going back further in time then.
Yeah. So to the pogroms and stuff like that. But also the early days of settlement in London and what it's like to be a refugee and that sort of thing. So, but there's going to be a lot more humour in the next one, I think. It's not.
And we've got a comment from Helen. The cover is just beautiful, and that's what first got her attention and made her want to look into your book.
Oh, thanks, Helen.
The cover, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does stand out, with all the pink on it. And as I say, it's I just think it captures the the joy of the young girl falling in love somehow. I'm really pleased with it.
Yeah, no, I felt that too, that it sort of captures what's inside Maya's head rather than what's going on outside of her.
Yes, yeah, because the way she tries to escape, her awful, awful surroundings is to close her eyes and imagine herself dancing, even if she can't actually dance. She
Mhm.
allows the dreams to take her away. So, and of course, the dance is pivotal when she meets the guard in the camp, because it's through dancing that he watches her and falls in love with her. Yeah,
Yeah,
important part of the book.
it is a very important part of the book. Now, as I said, it was an absolute roller coaster going through this book in a good way. I don't actually like real roller coasters, but I love book roller coasters, ones that take me on an emotional journey, and Maya's story certainly does do that. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Helen. If anyone does have any questions, if you are watching this back later, and this will now be there forever out there in cyberspace, so if you are watching this back at a later point in time and you do have a question for Helen, pop it into the comments and I can always let Helen know that it's there and she can pop in and answer them for you. Thank you so much for joining us, Helen, and we look forward to seeing the next historical offering that you have for us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been wonderful. Thanks.
No worries. See you next time, guys.